If you've ever stood in these mountains at night, you know this. Silence isn't quiet here, it listens. And sometimes it answers. The stories folks pass down, they're not bedtime tales, they're survival guides dressed as whispers. Not everyone should hear them, but you're here now, and once you do, you can't forget. Tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it? Drop it in the comments. It always chills me, knowing how many of us are scattered across the map, staring into the same shadows together. Hit like and subscribe. It helps more wanderers stumble into these woods, whether they're ready or not. Let's begin. I was 39 when I decided to walk away from everything familiar. At the time, I was an overworked paramedic in Roanoke, running shifts that chewed up nights and left me staring at ceilings in daylight, unable to close my eyes without hearing phantom sirens. Years of it had worn me down. I'd patched up strangers, held hands with the dying, and pulled bodies out of wrecks. What I hadn't done was breathe. When my supervisor finally insisted I take leave or burn out completely, I thought about beaches, cities, anything with people. But what I wanted wasn't noise. It was silence, the kind you can only find where people aren't. An older EMT I knew once mentioned a trail near Red Ash Ridge in southern West Virginia. Not on any maps. He'd heard of it from a hunter decades back. A place the holler swallowed, he called it. A cut-through road from old coal camps that never got finished. Now it was nothing but overgrowth and rumors. It sounded right. The drive took most of a day. Past towns where the gas stations sold more bait than food. Past clapboard houses leaning like they'd given up. Eventually the pavement crumbled to gravel, then to rutted clay pocked with standing water. The last mile was more scar than road. When I killed the engine, the quiet slammed down like a lid. The woods pressed close, trunks dark with moss, vines dragging low. A rusted survey stake stuck out of the dirt at an angle. No trail sign, no marker, just that. I hoisted my pack and walked. For hours the path climbed in switchbacks, roots clawing at my boots. Around dusk I reached a clearing by a shallow stream. The water was dark, running slow, lined with rocks that had symbols carved into them. Crosshatches, spirals, shapes worn shallow but deliberate. I squatted, ran my thumb along one. It felt too clean to be weathered. Still, the ground was flat enough for a tent, and the stream meant water. I told myself I was lucky. That night, I cooked beans on a camp stove, sipped warm bourbon, and listened to the stream burble. For the first time in years, there were no alarms, no radio chatter. Just the crackle of fire and the soft rasp of insects. It felt like relief. I woke to a noise that didn't belong. Not a twig snap, more like a drag. Something heavy scraping bark. I sat up, ears straining. The stream still moved, but I couldn't hear it anymore. The air was hollow, stripped of bugs, stripped of wind. Just silence. Then came another sound, a low whistle, 3 slow notes in a descending slide. It seemed far off, yet close enough to curl the hair at my neck. I clenched the flashlight, but something in me whispered, "Don't shine it." Instead, I sat in the dark, gripping the knife I kept by my bag, heart hammering. The sound didn't repeat. I stayed awake until dawn painted the ridge in pale gray. The next morning I went exploring to shake it off. About a mile uphill, the trail broke into the remnants of something older. A collapsed stone wall, half-eaten fence posts, and the foundation of a cabin. Only the chimney still stood, leaning like a tired old man. I should have turned back, but I pushed farther and found what stopped me cold. A series of small, smooth stones laid in a spiral pattern at the base of a sycamore. In the center sat a bone. Maybe deer, maybe not. Carved into the sycamore itself, just deep enough to curl bark, were the words. Not alone in the hollow. The letters were jagged as though gouged with a nail. That smell hit next, a cloying sweetness like fruit rotting in syrup. Beneath it lingered something sharper, almost metallic. My stomach turned. I hurried back to camp, every step echoing with the sense that the ridge wasn't empty. When I reached my tent, my stomach dropped. Things had been touched. Not stolen, not ransacked, touched. My sleeping bag was unzipped. My food bag opened and neatly tied shut again. My journal, usually buried, lay on top of the pack, its strap unbuckled. pages bent like they'd been turned with damp fingers. But the dirt told nothing. No tracks, no drag marks, smooth as if nothing had moved at all. Above me, from a low-hanging branch, dangled a bundle of twigs knotted with rough cord. Not a figure exactly, but something angular, with a spiral at its center. Bits of what looked like shed hair tangled in the knots. When I scanned the tree line, I saw more. Small bundles, tucked in shadows, some swaying slightly though no wind stirred. The woods were decorated, and I was in the middle of it. I didn't pack. Not yet. Instead, I sat by the fire, rifle resting across my knees, every muscle taut. The forest was too still. Hours stretched, brittle and fragile, until the whistle came again. This time it wasn't one. It was several. One straight ahead, another to my right, another behind me, each with the same 3 notes, overlapping, answering each other. Not birds. Not echoes. Signals. I gritted my teeth, trying not to move, but then came something worse. Whispers. Low, damp, like water seeping through stone. They drifted in circles, never clear, just wet syllables brushing my ear, as though spoken inches from me. When the fire guttered, I saw her. She stood across the stream, pale against the dark. Her feet were bare, ankles black with mud. A ragged shift clung to her body, as though she'd walked through water. Her hair hung in slick ropes, dripping, framing a face too pale, too thin. Her eyes were the worst, filmed over, clouded like milk glass. They never blinked. She raised a hand and pointed, not at me, but at the ridge where the old chimney leaned. My body chose before my mind could. I ran. Branches tore at me, roots caught my boots, the rifle slammed against my ribs, but I didn't stop until the truck gleamed in the moonlight like salvation. I dove inside, slammed the locks, and sat shaking as the woods pressed in. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. No one came. No whistle. No movement. Just silence. At dawn, I drove until the mountains peeled back into farmland. I checked into the first motel I found and collapsed. 2 hours later, sunlight pried me awake. My head still rang with the echoes of those 3 notes. I stepped outside, telling myself it was done. Then I saw the back of my truck, the glass smeared with prints. Small, bare, too many to count. Mud caked across the bumper, and tied to the trailer hitch was a new bundle of twigs, spiral knotted tight. I told the rangers. They didn't blink. One finally said, "Red Ash Ridge." Old story says when the coal road cut through, a family up there wouldn't leave. Said the woods belonged to them. Winter starved them out. Folks who went looking never found bodies, just stones set in spirals. They say she still walks the hollow path, marking whoever stumbles through. He didn't write anything down, just told me not to go back. I never did. But sometimes when nights go still, I hear it again. 3 notes. High, low, high. And in the morning, I find small spirals drawn in dust on my windowsill. Too neat to be accident. Too deliberate to ignore. It feels like the hollow is patient, like it's waiting for me to walk back in. I was 37 when it happened, though the years since have stretched it into something that feels both closer and more distant than it should. Back then, I was a field surveyor for a small environmental firm out of Charleston. My job usually meant trudging through damp woods and overgrown clearings, cataloging soil erosion or tree growth. Lonely work, but the kind I preferred. People expected little more than numbers and measurements from me, and I liked that. That summer, after a particularly brutal project ended, I decided I wanted to walk somewhere no one had asked me to. Not for work, not for data, just to vanish into the silence for a while. A colleague once mentioned an unmarked stretch of trail in the Monongahela backcountry, up near the West Virginia line. He'd heard it wasn't a real trail at all, just an old pack route used by miners in the 1800s, mostly reclaimed by the forest. It sounded perfect. The road narrowed the deeper I drove, gravel turning to clay ruts that clawed at my tires. By the time my GPS stuttered and went blank, I didn't mind. The mountains shouldered closer, their ridgelines stacked like a frozen tide. I parked in a pullover barely wide enough for the truck, slung my gear over my shoulder, and walked in. The air smelled thick, ferns and iron-rich soil, laced with something sharper like rusting nails. I didn't see another person, not even a hunter's marker or soda can. It was the kind of quiet that presses down, making you conscious of every step you take. I followed the trace of what might once have been a wagon road until the light broke against a shallow stream. Flat enough to pitch camp. I set my pack down, stretched, and for the first time in months felt the tension start to bleed from me. The woods watched. That's how it felt, anyway. I woke in the night to a sound I couldn't place. A single, hard crack, like timber splitting. At first I thought it was a branch breaking under an animal's weight. Deer, maybe. But then came another. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Not the way a deer moves, quick and skittish. More like a person who didn't care how much noise they made. I sat up, gripping my flashlight, scanning the trees. Nothing but black ribs of timber. And silence. No insects, no wind, not even the trickle of the creek. My breathing filled my ears until I almost believed I'd imagined it. Morning proved me wrong. About half a mile up the ridge, I found what was left of a stone structure. A wall chest high, a chimney leaning like a rotten tooth. The smell hit first, sickly sweet, like fruit left to rot in the sun. But layered under it was something sharper, faint but clinging. The smell of perfume, long since spoiled, soaked into damp wood. Carved into the trunk of a sycamore beside it were words, gouged deep enough to raise curling shavings. She waits in hollow shade. I didn't like how it looked, like whoever cut it wanted it to outlast the tree itself. Back at camp, I noticed the fire pit wasn't how I'd left it. Stones shifted. The logs I'd stacked scattered. My pack sat unzipped, every pocket open. Nothing stolen, just rearranged. My journal lay on top, its pages fanned like someone had thumbed through it. But there were no footprints. The dirt lay smooth, undisturbed, except for mine. That night, I didn't bother lying down. I sat by the fire with my thermos of bitter coffee, rifle propped across my knees. Hours passed, stretched taut and thin. Then, a hum. At first I thought it was wind seeping through hollow wood, but the rhythm was too steady. A tune soft and low, like someone rocking a child and singing half-remembered notes. It grew louder, wrapping around the clearing, threading between the trees. I couldn't pin a direction. It was everywhere. I told myself not to raise the flashlight, not to give away that I was listening. Then whispers joined it, wet, close murmurs that brushed the skin of my neck like breath. I was frozen, and that's when I saw her. She stepped into the firelight as though the trees had let her go. Her feet bare, toes blackened with soil. Her dress clung in tatters, dripping as though she'd crawled from water. Hair hung in damp ropes over her shoulders, but her eyes were wrong. Not white, not dark. Filmed, cloudy, like river ice that never melts. Her mouth sagged open too wide, lips split as though they'd been cut there by force. The hum poured out of her, low and endless, not rising, not falling, just continuing. She lifted a hand and pointed, not at me, but past me toward the ridge, toward that broken chimney. I bolted. Branches whipped at my face, roots clawed at my boots. The forest seemed to push back, refusing me exit. My flashlight swung wildly, my rifle slammed against my ribs, but I didn't stop until the gleam of my truck shivered in the moonlight. I drove without looking back. I didn't plan to stop, but when I rolled into the first town, Elkhorn, I went straight for the ranger outpost. My words came in a rush, clumsy, desperate. The ranger was an older man with tobacco-stained teeth. He didn't laugh. He just listened, eyes flat, then said, "You camp near Hollow Shade." He leaned back, scratching at the stubble on his jaw. Coal men had a settlement up there, 2 centuries ago. They brought their wives and children, lived off the ridge. One winter, sickness took most of 'em. Fever. They say one woman lost her mind, sang her babies to sleep and never let 'em wake again. When the men found her, she was still singing. Hung herself in the mine shaft the next morning. Folks say the shaft never closed, and neither did her song. He looked at me like he expected me to argue. "Best thing you can do is forget it," he said. "Don't go back. Hollow Shade doesn't like company." I nodded, thanked him, left. I've never returned. It should have ended there. But even now, when nights go still and the air presses in heavy, I hear it. That same hum. Not in dreams, not muffled or half-remembered. Awake, clear, threading through the corners of my house like it knows the way. And sometimes, when I leave my boots by the door, I find them shifted by morning, laces undone, as though someone had gently touched them in the dark, checking if I was ready for another walk back into hollow shade. I was 24 the summer it happened, still working as a teaching assistant at a community college in Ohio, stuck between the comfort of routine and the itch for something larger. Most of my friends from high school had scattered, jobs, marriages, kids. I felt like I was waiting for my real life to start, like I was a placeholder in my own story. That summer, my cousin Jeremy called me up with an idea he claimed would shake the dust off. He'd found a thread buried in some old survivalist forum, half dead, with broken links and forgotten usernames. Someone had posted coordinates for a stretch of woods along the Kentucky-West Virginia border in the Cumberland foothills. No official trail, no park signs, just land the state forgot. The post claimed it was untouched, older than the mountains around it. Jeremy loved things like that, urban legends, ghost towns, places locals warned outsiders not to wander. He convinced me and his roommate Darren to go. Darren worked nights as a paramedic and had the kind of reckless curiosity that made him say yes to anything involving risk. Me, I think I went because I wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere, even if it was in the middle of nowhere. The drive down was miserable. Jeremy's truck coughed on the steep grades, and the GPS dropped signal 2 hours in. We followed old logging roads that looked more like scars through the trees than anything meant for wheels. It was close to sunset when we finally reached a leaning metal post sunk in weeds. No sign, no paint, just a marker. We cut the engine and silence folded over us. Not the kind of quiet you get in the suburbs at night, when you can still hear the hum of air conditioners and the hiss of distant traffic. This was the kind that pressed down, thick, like the land itself didn't want to be disturbed. Jeremy grinned like a fool. Perfect, right? None of us said what we felt, that it was wrong. Not scary exactly, just wrong. We hiked less than a mile before finding a clearing beside a thin creek. The water ran over smooth stones carved with faint patterns, lines that looped and crossed, like someone had scratched them centuries ago and the forest had half swallowed them back. I knelt to touch one and it was cold. Not creek water cold, more like refrigerator cold, even though the air was humid enough to glue my shirt to my back. Darren muttered something about hillbilly runes and laughed, but Jeremy crouched over the markings longer than he should have, tracing one with his finger until I told him to knock it off. We pitched our tents, started a small fire, and tried to settle in. The air grew heavy as the night set in. Bugs didn't chirp. The creek moved but made no sound. Our fire popped weakly, flames leaning toward the woods like the dark was sucking them in. At one point Jeremy pulled out a battered mandolin he dragged along and plucked a tune. The notes rang sharp and too clear, like the forest was throwing them back at us instead of absorbing them. Then everything cut out. Not just his playing, everything. Silence deeper than before. That's when I saw him. Across the creek, up on a rise, stood a figure. Barefoot, shirtless, suspenders that hung loose from shoulders sharp as fence posts. His skin looked stretched too tight, cracked in places like clay left in the sun. He didn't blink, didn't move, just watched. Darren, ever the smartass, raised a hand like he was greeting a neighbor. The figure didn't react. After maybe half a minute, it turned and slipped into the trees. No rustle, no sound, just gone. I wanted to pack up right then, but no one said anything. Instead, we sat around the fire, forcing jokes until they fell flat. When I finally lay in my tent, I didn't sleep. I listened. That's when I heard my name, drawn out, breathless, like someone whispering through cupped hands. Eli! I froze, heart slamming. Then Darren's voice hissed from the next tent over. You heard that too? We stayed awake until dawn. Morning light made everything feel ridiculous. Birds sang. The creek babbled like it should. Jeremy insisted we climb the ridge where the figure had stood. The climb was brutal, roots tugging at our boots, loose shale sliding underfoot. At the top we found no view. just a blackened ring of stones and a carved post about waist high, its surface stacked with faces, mouths stretched wide in silent screams. The wood at the base was stained dark. Sap, maybe. I didn't want to guess. Jeremy knelt, whispering. Same markings as the creek rocks. That's when we heard it. Laughter. High-pitched, but wrong, like a child mimicking an adult, or the forest itself choking on the sound. It didn't come from one direction. It came from everywhere. We bolted. I slipped, skinning my forearm open on shale, but I didn't stop until camp was in sight. Darren was already tearing down his tent. Jeremy just stared at the treeline, pale, like he'd recognized something in that laugh. We should have left, but Jeremy swore we'd regret bailing. He said we were overreacting, that we'd laugh about it later. Darren muttered he'd rather laugh alive. But in the end, we stayed. That night, the forest grew stranger. The silence came back thicker. The shadows of the trees stretched wrong across the firelight, bending toward us like they had joints. And then the mandolin, Jeremy hadn't touched it since the first night, started to hum on its own. Strings quivering. No one near it. I swear I saw a shape crouched just beyond the firelight. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted like it didn't understand how to wear it. And when it opened its mouth, the laugh came again, pouring out of the woods, out of everywhere. We didn't sleep. By sunrise, Jeremy was gone. His tent sat unzipped, gear inside. His boots were lined neatly at the flap. The mandolin lay on the ground, one string snapped clean through. The creek stones were wet, though it hadn't rained. And across their surface, new carvings had appeared. Faces, mouths open wide, matching the totem on the ridge. We searched, calling his name, but the woods gave nothing back. By noon, Darren said enough. We shoved everything into bags and stumbled back toward the truck. My ears rang the whole way, like the silence had followed us. The engine fought us, coughing like it didn't want to leave. When it finally caught, we drove until the trees thinned and cell service returned. We didn't speak. Jeremy never came back. No body. No note. Nothing but his boots and that broken mandolin string. Darren lasted a few months before moving west. We barely talk now. I still dream about that ridge sometimes. About those faces stacked on wood, screaming in silence. About the whisper of my name and the laugh that doesn't belong to anything human. Once, in the middle of grading papers, I found myself scribbling symbols across the margin, loops and lines I didn't remember starting. When I looked closer, I realized they weren't random. They were mouths, all of them open. I was 41 the summer I decided to vanish into the woods. Not in the dramatic sense, no plans to disappear forever, just a retreat. My work as a correctional officer had ground me down to the bone. Years of clanging gates, sour coffee, and the constant hum of fluorescent lights had hollowed something out of me. Nights I couldn't sleep, I'd hear the echo of keys and the drag of steel doors even in my own house. I needed quiet, but not the kind a weekend at home could give. I wanted to be somewhere the world couldn't reach me. That's when I heard about Black Hollow. An old-timer at a bait shop told me about it in passing. Used to be a spur trail off Panther Ridge, he said, his hands working a tin of chew. But the state closed it off when folks kept getting turned around. Whole place feels wrong. They say if you wander far enough, you'll hear breath that ain't your own. He laughed, but his eyes didn't. I looked it up later. No official maps. Just scraps of chatter buried in old hiking forums, threads long abandoned. People mentioned stone circles, woven walls, and things left behind in clearings. One reply ended with 4 words that hooked me. She keeps to herself. That was enough for me. I drove down a road that looked more like a scar through the woods than anything planned by man. The canopy folded in, branches raking the roof of my truck. When I finally stopped, the air was damp, thick with the smell of iron and wet leaves. There was no sign, no marker. Just a break in the brush. I hiked for hours. The trail, if you could call it that, twisted in on itself, overgrown, claustrophobic. The deeper I went, the darker it grew, as if the sun had less strength here. By evening, I found a flat patch near an old stone ring, half sunken into the earth. The rocks were blackened as though scorched long ago, though no moss clung to them. It felt deliberate. I pitched my tent, boiled water, ate jerky, and waited for the stillness to settle. For once, my shoulders loosened. That night I slept like the dead, until the silence woke me. It wasn't sound that stirred me. It was the lack of it. The woods had gone flat. No crickets, no frogs, no breeze. Just heavy nothing. Then came the breath. Slow. Heavy. Right beside the nylon wall of my tent. I froze, my fists balled so tight my fingers cramped. It wasn't the huff of an animal. It was too steady, too deliberate, each inhale long and deep, like someone savoring the scent of me. Then came a step. Barefoot. I could hear the earth compress beneath it. One step. Then nothing. I don't know when I blacked out, but when gray light finally broke, I unzipped the tent with shaking hands. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Bare. Human. Toes splayed too wide, the arch is wrong. They circled the tent in a complete ring. My gut told me to leave. My pride told me to stay. By midday, I stumbled into a place that didn't belong in this century. Trees had been bent and woven together into walls, forming a crooked enclosure. Bones dangled from the branches on rough twine. Deer skulls, raccoon jaws, possum skeletons. One looked like a dog, its teeth still bared. And in the middle of it all, a pile of clothes. Moldy, decayed in all sizes. Work boots. A frayed denim jacket. Children's shirts faded to rags. On top lay a tiny pink sandal, the strap half torn. That was when my chest tightened with the truth. I was in someone's place. And I wasn't welcome. I didn't light a fire. Didn't cook. I sat in the dark with my knife across my lap, eyes on the tent flap. At 2:43, yes, I was counting. The breathing returned. This time it circled, slow, patient. Each inhale dragged longer, deeper, like it was pulling my scent into its lungs. Then came the scratching. Fingernails, not claws, dragged across the nylon wall, tracing lines. I whispered, "Go away." Over and over, a chant for myself as much as for it. The scratching stopped. Then came the weight. Something pressed onto the roof of the tent. Light. Precise. Like a hand. One thump, then stillness. I sat there, teeth clenched, until dawn finally cracked the ridge. When I crawled out, a rabbit lay at the flap. Neatly placed. No head. No blood. Just the body. I packed in minutes. I barreled through brush, not caring about trails. At one stream crossing, my pack snagged on a branch. The map slipped free, carried off by the current. I didn't go after it. That's when I saw him. In a clearing ahead, crouched low. At first I thought it was a man, but no man looked like that. His skin was blackened, cracked like bark burned by fire. Patches of ash clung to him. His eyes were too wide, too pale, glowing faintly even in daylight. He didn't move when I saw him, just crouched, watching. I ran. I don't remember much after that. The woods tilted, spun, dragged me down into a half-dream. Branches clawed my arms. My lungs burned. Then, out of nowhere, the shape of a ranger shack broke through the trees. I collapsed on the porch, banging the door with the last of my strength. When I woke, 2 men were inside with me, uniforms faded but official enough. I told them everything, the breathing, the footprints, the bones, the woven walls, the thing in the clearing. Halfway through, one of them stood and walked out without a word. The other just leaned on the table and said, "Where'd you say you were?" "Black Hollow," I croaked. He nodded slowly. "Closed since '96. Folks went missing. We don't keep it on maps." I asked about the man I saw. He didn't blink. Just said, "There's no man in Black Hollow." That night, I checked into a cheap motel off the highway. Scrubbed myself raw in the shower. Laid down. But when the room went quiet, I heard it again. The breathing. Slow. Heavy. Just beyond the glass. I yanked the curtain. Nothing. But smeared across the window were prints. Bare. Toes spread wide. Too wide. And in the corner of the sill, tucked neatly into the frame, was a tiny pink sandal. I don't hike anymore. Not alone. Not ever. But sometimes, when my house goes too still, I swear I hear it again. Breathing. Waiting. I was 31 when I took the job that nearly ended me. I wasn't a trail worker, not exactly. I was a contract surveyor. My role was less glamorous. walking forgotten corridors of the Appalachian backcountry to record erosion, map hazards, and check whether abandoned trails were worth reopening. The Forest Service outsourced those jobs when nobody else wanted them. Most of my peers avoided Ashfork Gap, not because of bears, cliffs, or weather. It had a reputation. Everyone had a story. Compasses spinning, GPS freezing, entire crews swearing they'd walked in circles for hours. Some whispered about hunters who vanished in the 90s, or search dogs refusing to enter certain stands of timber. I didn't buy into it. I needed the paycheck, and I thought solitude would be a relief. After years working as a dispatcher for emergency services, listening to screams and static at 3 in the morning, I craved the silence of trees. Out here, nobody called for help. It was meant to be a 3-day inspection. Simple. Routine. It wasn't. The drive-in took me through roads that narrowed into veins of mud. By the time I reached the trailhead, the brush leaned so close it scraped the paint off my truck. No signpost. No marker. Just a rusted length of pipe hammered into the soil. The trail was faint, overgrown, but not impassable. The first few miles felt almost ordinary. Fern thickets, the smell of wet loam, the chatter of chickadees. I remember thinking the place had been exaggerated, its reputation inflated by the tired minds of other workers. But around mile 8, I saw it. A plank nailed to a chest-high oak, an arrow painted in sloppy red, pointing hard left. Not toward any side path, just straight into unbroken woods. I made a note, snapped a photo, brushed it off as a prank. By nightfall, I'd pitched my tent on a ridge just beyond it. Dinner was freeze-dried stew and a flask of bourbon. For once, I thought I might actually sleep, but Ashfork had other plans. Sometime after midnight, I woke up hard, heart jackhammering like I'd been shoved awake. I held still, listening. That's when I heard them. High, reedy notes. Not birds. Not coyotes. Short bursts, uneven, just outside the tent. They came in pairs, then triplets, then silence. I unzipped the bag just enough to free my knife. My eyes stayed glued to the nylon wall, waiting for a shadow. But the noises cut out all at once, leaving me with nothing but the pounding of my own pulse. I lay awake until dawn, knife in hand. The next morning, I couldn't shake the image of that painted arrow. The red streaks had lodged in my brain, brighter than they should have been. I told myself I'd check it out, 10 minutes in, then back. A GPS reading, a photo, nothing more. When I returned to the oak, the paint still gleamed wet in my memory, though it was flaking in reality. I stepped past it into brush that hadn't been disturbed in years. The light changed almost immediately. Less filtered sun, more shadow. The air smelled different too, like moss gone sour. I pushed through for maybe 15 minutes before the forest shifted. The trees were wrong. Taller, older, but bent, their bark mottled with growths like black velvet. The ground was uneven, full of shallow pits. And there, half collapsed, lay a structure. Not a cabin, at least not anymore. Just the suggestion of walls, boards jutting from dirt, nails orange with rust. One corner of the frame leaned drunkenly but still upright. I marked a waypoint, took a photo, and turned back. That's when I realized the arrow tree was gone. I wasn't panicked yet. I'd been turned around before. I carved a small V into the bark every 20 steps. But after 6, maybe 7 marks, the trail behind me came up clean. No scars. No cuts. Just bark. My stomach tightened. That's when the objects started appearing. First a child's sneaker, pink, toe split wide, half buried under leaves. Then a coil of rope laid neatly at the base of a cedar, frayed but arranged in a perfect loop. Then a rusted canteen, polished on one side as though a hand had rubbed it smooth for years. Every object looked tended, weathered, but not ruined. Then came the tarp. It was bright blue, tied between 2 trees. Beneath it, a blanket, faded green, bones arranged in a human frame. The arms were crossed over the chest. The skull tilted upward, mouth open in a silent gasp. I couldn't breathe. I took 2 steps back. Then another. That's when the plank appeared at my feet. The same one with the arrow. Only this time it lay loose on the ground, its nail bent, no tree in sight. And behind the leaning wall of the collapsed cabin, I saw a shape. It wasn't moving. It just stood there. Tall, thin, its outline blurred by ash-colored rags. The head cocked, eyes wide and pale, too pale, reflecting what little light seeped through. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked. I stepped back. That's when I noticed it. An orange blaze painted fresh on a tree behind me. Not old, not faded, new. I bolted. I don't know how I made it back. Branches clawed at me, mud sucked at my boots, but the blazes appeared again and again, too bright, too recent, guiding me out. I ran past my camp, left my gear behind, didn't care. For 10 straight miles I didn't stop, lungs tearing, legs trembling, until the ranger station rose out of the treeline like salvation. I must have looked wild. Dirt smeared, eyes blown wide. I didn't care. I deleted the photo, erased the waypoint, wrote nothing of it in my report. On the drive back, I passed the oak. The arrow was back, nailed firm, pointing in. I didn't speak about it for months. But one night, over beers, I cracked. The old surveyor I told just stared into his glass and said, "You found the Ashfork blazes." He told me the story. Miners once tried to cut a road through that ridge. The crew chief used blaze marks to guide them. But he drove them too far, and they never came back. When a search party went in, the blazes led them in circles. Tools, clothes, bones laid out like shrines. The locals said the chief still walked it, pale-eyed, marking the trees, luring others down the hollow road. "The blazes don't save you," the surveyor said. "They choose you." I quit not long after. Took a desk job in town. Safer that way. But sometimes when I'm walking home after dark, I see them. Orange slashes on telephone poles. On fence posts. On the alley wall behind my apartment. Fresh. Wet. Pointing. Like Ashfork Gap followed me home. And I know sooner or later I'll have to see where they lead. My name's Daniel Harlow, I'm 48, and I've spent most of my adult life as a forestry consultant. Developers call me in when they're debating whether some patch of woodland is worth preserving, logging, or carving up into cabins. It's not glamorous work, but it pays steady and I like the quiet. I usually take contracts closer to North Carolina, where I live, but last October I got offered a small side job out in eastern Tennessee, not far from the border with Virginia. A man left a voicemail, didn't give a last name, just said Mr. Corbin, asking if I could do a quick timber assessment on his family's old land near a nearly forgotten hamlet called Ashlick Hollow. 80 acres. Supposedly hadn't been checked in decades. He wanted an official report before the winter rains made the back roads impassable. I figured 2 days at most, maybe 3 if the terrain was rough. I wasn't eager to go that far into the mountains alone, but work had been thin that month. And something in his voice, flat, almost rehearsed, felt like he was offering it to me specifically, not just anyone. That sat strangely in my gut, but I told myself it didn't matter. Money was money. The last paved stretch wound past abandoned gas stations, one-room churches with sagging roofs, and rusted mailboxes leaning like headstones. Eventually I found myself on a gravel track, so chewed up it rattled my teeth. A mile down, the gravel gave way to a churn of dirt and ruts. I pulled the truck into a clearing where hunters had left an old fire ring. Beyond that, no vehicle was going any farther. No signal, naturally. I'd expected that. I loaded up my pack, compass, tapes, survey flags, notebooks, and a small tent. I've spent enough nights in the woods to know what I need. I started down what looked like a faint animal trail. The trees here weren't like the hardwood stands I was used to. These were crooked, pale-trunked things, with bark that peeled in curling strips. The whole place smelled faintly of iron and damp clay, not pine or loam. About half a mile in, I noticed the first stack. It looked like someone had balanced smooth gray rocks into a tapering spire, almost like a seashell twisting upward. Waist high, maybe 15 stones, each one a different shade from the red shale littering the slope. At first I figured some bored kids had hiked up here years back. But the stones looked newly washed, no moss, no soil marks. Fresh. I logged the coordinates, made a quick sketch, and moved on. But soon I found another, this one crumbling near a shallow ditch. Then a third, hidden under brush, perfectly intact. By the time I reached the spot I planned to camp, I'd seen 4 of them. They were too uniform, too deliberate, like boundary markers, but not on any property map I'd ever seen. I told myself it was nothing, just odd, nothing more. I pitched my tent in a sheltered depression. The air had the heavy, still feel that warns of coming rain, so I skipped a fire. Just a cold supper, a few notes in the log, and I tried to get some sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I woke with my heart already hammering. Something was outside. Slow, heavy footfalls crunched over the leaves. 1 step every few seconds. Not the erratic shuffle of a raccoon or deer. This was steady, intentional. The steps circled the tent once, then again. I lay there gripping the handle of my knife, hardly breathing. Whoever, or whatever it was, never spoke, never sniffed, never brushed the tent wall. Just paced. Then came a different sound, right behind my head. A violent tug, like something yanking a root out of packed soil. And then silence. I don't think I slept again. At dawn I crawled out, stiff and shaking. My survey flag, the one I'd planted the evening before, was gone. I spotted it 20 feet away, jammed straight through the bleached skull of a rabbit. The skull was dry as dust. No flesh, no blood. But I'd walked that stretch yesterday. It wasn't there then. I should have left right there. Packed up, hiked out, driven back to Raleigh, and forgotten the whole thing. But a mix of stubbornness and professional pride made me push deeper into the property. By midday, I was finding other signs. Carvings nailed to trees, stick figure bodies with long arms and eyeless faces. Stones laid out in crooked lines that started and ended without reason. And in one clearing, impossibly, a mattress. Just the rusted springs really, foam rotted away, sitting in the open as though someone had dragged it miles off any road and left it there. Around 4 o'clock, I stumbled on what looked like a grave. A neat mound of earth with a crude wooden cross pressed flat across it. No name. 4 nails hammered into the wood in the shape of an X. I turned and left without marking it. That night, I set up camp higher on a slope, under a shallow rock shelf. I thought elevation would help me feel less cornered. It didn't. At 1:30 a.m., I woke to whispering. Not words I could understand. Wet, burbling noises, as if someone were trying to speak through water. More than one voice, circling the tent, never stepping close enough to touch. I didn't dare unzip the flap. I just froze, praying for them to fade. Then came a glow, faint orange weaving through the trees, low to the ground, like a torch cradled in cupped hands. And then the smell, thick, acrid, unmistakable. Burned hair, burned flesh. My stomach turned. My vision tunneled. And then blackness. I must have fainted from pure terror. When I came to, the sun was already up. My body ached like I'd run miles in my sleep. Sweat had dried sticky on my skin. I knew then I was done. No report was worth another night here. I shoved my gear into the pack and bolted downhill, ignoring compass bearings, just angling for where I thought the truck must be. Halfway down, I saw one of the stone spirals I'd logged the first day. But it had changed. Now a deer's jawbone was tied to the top, strands of hair, human hair, dangling from it like a grisly flag. At the base lay another of my survey flags, snapped in half and stabbed into the dirt. I ran. By the time I stumbled into the clearing, lungs burning, the truck was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. I didn't check my phone for messages, didn't look back once. I drove until I hit a town with service, parked at a gas station, and sat there shaking until the sun went down. I sent the invoice later that week, short and terse. I never heard back from Mr. Corbin. No follow-up call, no complaint, no payment either. I let it go. Some jobs aren't worth chasing. Months later, over beers with a retired ranger I sometimes work with, I mentioned Ashlick Hollow in passing. He went quiet, eyes narrowing. "Folks still wander up there?" he asked. I told him what I'd seen, at least the pieces I dared to admit without sounding insane. He nodded slowly. Old-timers used to say Ashlick was where the hollow men walked. Not ghosts, not people, something between. Said they marked their ground with stones so no one would forget whose land it was. I laughed it off, though my throat was tight. And the whispers? Echoes of voices that went missing there, he said, dead serious. Once you hear them, you don't go back. I haven't set foot in those mountains since. But sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet, I swear I hear that same low rustling, like something being torn out of the earth just beyond the wall. And each time, I find myself checking the corners of the yard in the morning, half expecting to see a spiral of clean gray stones waiting for me. My name is Aaron Clay. I was 29 when this happened, fresh out of a master's program in environmental history, broke, and too restless to sit in my little basement apartment in Knoxville. I wasn't running from heartbreak or catastrophe. I was just tired of screens and deadlines. One evening, scrolling through old hiking forums, I found a thread about lost miners' trails deep in the Cumberland stretch of Appalachia. Folks argued about which paths were real, which were just folklore. But one post stood out, some guy claiming he'd found remnants of an abandoned survey path near a hollow outside a place called Darrenton. Supposedly, the miners carved spirals and stacked stones to keep watch when they weren't there. It was vague, half rambling, but it hooked me. I told myself I'd document it, maybe spin it into an article. Truth is, I wanted to vanish into silence for a week and pretend I was doing something scholarly. So I packed light, bivy sack, small stove, notebooks, topo maps. My phone stayed in airplane mode. I rented a beater of a car, drove past Darrenton until the blacktop crumbled into gravel, and parked where the road dissolved into mud. Beyond that point, it was boots and nothing else. The entry to the path wasn't marked. It was a break in the tree line, just a shoulder-wide gap with trampled underbrush. I would have missed it if I hadn't been searching for it. At first, the trail felt like any other Appalachian cut. Leaf litter, roots, the smell of damp rock. But the trees were different here, shorter, with pale bark that peeled in curls like skin left too long in water. The canopy pressed close, muting the sky. Half an hour in, I noticed the first pile of stones. 3 smooth rocks stacked like they'd been set down yesterday, balanced so precisely that the smallest breeze should have toppled them. Trail art, I thought. Harmless. But as I walked deeper, I saw another. Then another. Always just when I was starting to think I'd lost the path. I made camp beside a broken boulder, split clean as though lightning had punched through it. I ate ramen by the faint glow of my stove, jotted some notes about the odd stone piles, then zipped myself into the bivvy. Silence pressed in. No cicadas, no crickets, not even owls. Just stillness. Sometime after midnight, I woke to sound. Not rustling, not scurrying. A sharp, deliberate click. Then a pause. Then another click. 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 Evenly spaced, like knuckles tapping glass. I froze, ears straining. After a dozen beats, it stopped. I slid the bivvy open, swept my flashlight in an arc. Nothing. Just trunks, shadows, the looming rock. But when I circled around the boulder, my stomach dropped. 4 flat stones were laid in a straight line directly behind my sleeping spot. Evenly spaced. Precise. They hadn't been there before. I backed into the bivvy, knife clutched to my chest, and lay awake till the horizon bled gray. I packed faster than I ever had in my life. 20 minutes down the trail, another pile waited. 5 rocks this time, tucked against a tree. Beside it, gouged deep into the bark, was a spiral. Rawwood showed through like a wound. It hadn't been there long. The cuts were fresh. I should have turned back. But curiosity gnawed at me, journalist brain convincing me this was research. An hour later, the trail dipped into a hollow. Brush thickened into tangles, laurel closed in, vines snagged at my pack. Visibility shrank to 10 feet. My pace slowed, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, careful, staying just behind me. I stopped. They stopped. My throat went dry. I spun, flashlight ready, though it was daylight. Nothing but green shadows. Hello, I croaked. Silence. When I started walking again, the steps resumed. I quickened my pace, then jogged. The steps followed, never closing, never falling behind. Just a mirror of mine. The trail curved against a rock wall. At the bend, an orange scrap of ribbon fluttered on a branch, the same kind I'd seen miles earlier. Only this one veered uphill into thick brush. I almost ignored it, but something pulled me toward it. 10 feet off the path sat a stump. On top of it, bones. Small, pale, arranged in a spiral. Ribs, jaws, tiny femurs. A red string looped around the stump like a crude frame. Animal bones, I told myself. Had to be, but my skin prickled. I backed away, rejoined the trail, and walked faster. Near dusk, I reached an old footbridge spanning a trickling creek. Yesterday it had felt sturdy. Now the planks sagged under my boots. One bowed so low I nearly punched through. Halfway across, I glanced at the railing. A spiral had been carved deep into the wood, dark sap, or something thicker, still seeping from it. Instinctively, I touched it. My fingers came back sticky. The smell hit me then, coppery, sharp, like blood gone stale. I wiped my hand on my pants and nearly ran across. I camped that night only because the fading light forced me to. I found a flat rise, set up under a ledge, and sat awake long after I should have been asleep. At 2 a.m., the whispers started. Not words, gurgling, wet syllables like someone trying to speak underwater. Several voices circling, never stepping close enough to touch. My pulse hammered. I held still, breath shallow. And then the glow came. A faint orange, weaving through the trees, low to the ground as though carried in cupped hands. The air filled with the stench of burned hair. I remember gagging, then blackness, like my brain just shut off. When the sun burned through, I woke drenched in sweat, body stiff like I'd been running all night. I packed in silence, refusing to look anywhere but the trail ahead. Halfway down, I saw one of the first stone stacks I'd marked. But it wasn't the same. Now a deer's jawbone dangled from the top, tied with human hair. At its base, a snapped survey flag was stabbed into the dirt. I never carried flags. I ran. When my car appeared between the trees, it looked unreal, like a hallucination. I almost sobbed with relief. I hurled my pack into the back seat and locked the doors before I even sat down. My breath fogged the windshield as I fumbled the key. The engine coughed, hesitated, then roared to life. As I turned onto the gravel road, I checked the mirror. At the edge of the woods stood a figure. Too far for detail, but tall. Still, watching. I didn't stop until I'd passed 2 towns. Weeks later, I mentioned Darrenton Hollow to a librarian friend who grew up nearby. Her face went pale. "They still wander out there?" she asked. "Who?" I said. She hesitated, then whispered, "The Bone Watchers. Miners who got trapped underground when the shaft collapsed. Folks said their families carved spirals and stacked stones so the dead could find their way out. But instead, they came back wrong. They linger, marking anyone who trespasses." I laughed it off, though the sound cracked in my throat. She only shook her head. "If they marked you, Aaron, you won't need to go back. They'll find you." I haven't stepped into a forest since. But sometimes at night I hear it again, that dry, even click, click, click echoing from somewhere inside my apartment walls. And when I wake in the morning, I swear there's a stone or 2 stacked neatly outside my door. My name is Matthew Greer. I was 37 the summer I tried to prove to myself I still belonged in the woods. I'd grown up in southern Ohio, close enough to the Appalachian ridges to know their moods, but far enough away to never fear them. My father was the real outdoorsman. When he died last spring, I inherited his maps, his compass, and a nagging sense that I'd let him down by living most of my life behind a desk. I'm a high school history teacher. My colleagues thought I was taking a trip to clear my head. The truth was simpler. I wanted to walk alone in the mountains where Dad used to wander, and maybe come back with a story that felt like his. I chose the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. Fewer tourists than the Smokies, deeper hollows, and trails that fray into nothing if you follow them long enough. My plan: 5 days out, carrying bivvy gear, minimal rations, and my father's old compass. The first day was uneventful: sore calves, humid air, the usual chatter of chickadees and squirrels. By the second morning, I'd settled into rhythm. Step, breathe, sip, check compass, repeat. Then came a split my map didn't acknowledge. 2 rutted paths diverged at a thicket of black birch. No signpost, no spray paint blaze. Just a choice. The left spur looked faintly trampled, maybe by hunters. The right vanished into undergrowth. I hesitated, studied the compass, then chose left. Half a mile on, I spotted something strange at the base of a leaning oak. A slab of rock, shaped like a headstone but smoother, blank as paper. Not carved, not natural either. I crouched, touched the stone. It felt cold, colder than the soil around it. I told myself it was some old boundary marker. Snapped a photo. Kept walking. 20 minutes later I saw another. And another. Each slightly different. One chipped at the corner, one furred with moss, one gleaming raw. They multiplied as I walked, and none of them matched the earlier ones I swore I'd seen. My skin prickled. I turned back toward the fork, heart racing. But the way back only offered more stones. Their faces seemed to tilt toward me like blank watchers. When I finally stumbled onto the original split, I didn't pause. I plunged right. I camped beside a thin stream, filtered water, chewed jerky, forced myself to relax. The woods hushed quickly after dusk. I lay in my bivvy, staring at nylon inches from my face, just beginning to drift when the voices came. Faint. Far. Not words, just murmurs and the occasional rise of laughter. 2, maybe 3 people? I sat up, ears straining. No lantern glow, no crunch of leaves, just disembodied tones sliding between trees. I unzipped the bivvy, held my breath. Silence. 10 minutes later I gave up, zipped back in. But I slept poorly, and when dawn came, something worse waited. At the water's edge, 3 sets of footprints pressed into soft earth. Bare feet, heel to toe, toes splayed wide like they belonged to people who'd never worn shoes. They all faced the same direction, into the trees away from camp. My stomach knotted. I packed without eating and followed the stream downstream, hoping it would eventually cross a familiar trail. Around midday I stopped for water. That's when I saw it, a necklace dangling from a low branch. Wooden beads strung on twine, weathered black with age. It swayed though the air was still. I didn't touch it. I stepped back and kept moving, eyes flicking to every limb, every knot of shadow. Later that afternoon, more stones appeared. At first scattered off trail, then square in the center, forcing me to step around them. Each time I passed, I felt the irrational certainty that I'd just disrespected something. Dark caught me still walking. My flashlight beam jittered across trunks until I found a patch of uneven ground just flat enough for the bivvy. I collapsed without dinner. Sometime after midnight, cold stabbed me awake. Not chilly mountain air, cold. Freezing like ice water poured into the bag. My sleeping bag felt damp, slick against my clothes. Condensation? Impossible in that volume. I reached for my flashlight. It wasn't where I'd left it by my head. My hand brushed it zipped inside the tent flap. On the inside, someone had unzipped the door, slipped it in, zipped it back. My chest locked. I clicked it on. 2 black handprints smeared the inner wall of the bivvy, one on each side near my feet. Wide palms, long fingers, as if someone had pressed in from the outside, hard enough to leave their mark. I tore camp apart in minutes and walked through the night, guided only by adrenaline and that weak cone of light. By the 4th day I was utterly lost. My phone was useless, charger drained. I followed the stream like it was a lifeline. Late afternoon brought the smell of smoke. Acrid recent. I crept into a clearing. At its center sagged a shack stitched from rotting boards. Smoke puffed from a crooked pipe. I called out. Nothing. Inside, the shack held one room. A cot, a table, a stone hearth. On the table lay a notebook bound in twine. I opened it. Every page began the same. He walked again today. Entries stretched back years. He stood by the oak. He knocked 3 times. He has a voice now. The final page stopped me cold. He entered the tent tonight. I dropped the notebook and ran. That night I didn't set a tent. Didn't roll a bag. I collapsed under open sky, flashlight clenched. The voices returned. Not drifting now. Encircling. Same distance, same volume, orbiting me. Then they ceased. A single whisper bloomed inches from my ear. Words I couldn't decipher, but the cadence was intimate, like someone leaning close. I lay rigid until dawn bled through. Then I ran, abandoning gear, food, everything. By noon I stumbled onto asphalt. 6 miles later, A ranger in a pickup braked beside me. "What happened?" he asked. "Lost the trail," I muttered. My throat burned with lies. He nodded. "These woods, they'll turn a man around. Mess with his head." I just nodded back. Weeks later, curiosity gnawed at me. I scoured local archives online. Old miners' unions. Oral histories. I found him, the Lantern Man of Spruce Fork. A miner buried alive in a shaft collapse a century ago. Families claimed his spirit wandered hollows, stacking stones and marking those who strayed too far. Lantern light meant he was near. Voices meant he'd already chosen you. I closed the laptop, stomach sour. I haven't gone near a forest since. But at night, when the house is quiet, I sometimes wake to faint light sliding under the doorframe, flickering like a lantern carried in careful hands. And once, outside my apartment window, I swore I saw 3 flat stones stacked neatly on the sill. My name is Paul Mercer. I was 41 this summer. I finally cracked and went alone into the northern Appalachians. I'd been a facilities inspector for the State Park Service for nearly 2 decades. Most of the job was dull, checking latrines, replacing trail signs, noting storm damage. But after my wife passed the previous winter, I used the work as an excuse to disappear. No one questions when the widower lingers too long in the field. That August, I signed out for 4 days of trail survey in a section no one really patrolled anymore. Locals called it Grafton Wash, a sunken valley carved by forgotten mining creeks. I wanted distance, silence, and if I was honest, something meaner than grief to occupy my head. The pull-off was barely a scar of gravel. I parked the truck, slung the pack, and followed a fading line of trail that bled into trees. No markers, no blazes, just habit telling me to keep east. By dusk of the first day, I'd walked 8 miles. The wash had its own atmosphere. The air smelled metallic, streams ran orange with iron, and the trees twisted inward as if guarding something. I found a flat rise, set camp, ate jerky and apples, and stared at the fire until the coals collapsed. Sleep came easy. Grief had trained me to exhaustion. The second morning, I boiled instant coffee on the stove. That's when I noticed the first marker. Just beyond the circle of ash stood a stone knee-high, rounded at the top, smoothed like river rock. It leaned against a pine, blank but deliberate. I knew I hadn't seen it when pitching camp. An hour deeper into the wash, another appeared. Then another. Always by the trail, always angled toward me. I snapped a photo, but unease settled in. Boundary stones, maybe? Old miners? My rational brain tried explanations. But each one looked freshly placed, earth still disturbed at the base. By late afternoon I found 3 in a row, like sentinels. My skin prickled. That night, I decided not to light a fire. The forest went still after dark. Around 11, a sound pried me awake, 3 slow knocks. Not on my tent. Not on stone. On wood. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Then 3 more. I gripped the knife, listening. Then came the pacing. Heavy, deliberate steps circling my tent. Every crunch of leaf pressed down with intent. Something brushed the nylon wall, soft, like a hand sliding along fabric. My chest seized. I unzipped, thrust the flashlight out. The beam cut nothing but brush. Except by the cold fire ring, sat a bundle. It was my lantern. I'd left it inside the pack. Now it stood upright, with polished, as if placed for me. My hands shook too hard to pick it up. I crawled back inside and held the knife until dawn. I left before the sun cleared the ridge. Half a mile down, I saw footprints. Not mine. Not boots. Bare. Long-toed, wide, pressing deep into the mud, weaving beside my path before vanishing into brush. Further on, a cord stretched between 2 saplings at chest height. From it dangled bones, rabbits, birds, all knotted with dark feathers. A charm. A ward. Or a warning. I cut it with my knife and stepped over, heart hammering. By midday I heard it, humming. A woman's voice. Slow, tuneless, threading between the trees. I froze, every nerve alive. It faded. Silence returned. But later, as shadows stretched long, I heard my name. Not shouted. Not distant. Whispered close, like lips grazing my ear. Paul. I spun. No one stood there. Only the leaning stones. Near twilight, smoke reached me. I pushed into a clearing and found a shack, boards gray with rot, roof patched with tin. From a crooked pipe rose thin smoke. I knocked. No answer. Inside, a single cot, a table, a hearth of stone. On the table lay a notebook bound in twine. I opened it. Every page began, "She walked again today." Entries stretched back decades. She tapped 3 times. She left the rope on the branch. She spoke a name. The final page chilled me. She entered the tent tonight. I dropped the notebook and bolted into the dark. I didn't pitch camp. I lay beneath the stars, pack still strapped, lantern clutched to my chest. The humming returned, circling. No footfalls, no crack of twigs, just that woman's tune bending around me. Then silence. Then the whisper, closer than breath. "Paul." I didn't move until dawn. By sunrise, I abandoned everything. Left stove, tent, food. Just staggered east until the trail broke into gravel. 6 miles later, a ranger truck slowed. The man asked what happened. "Got turned around," I muttered. My throat was raw. He studied me, then said, "The wash can do that. Folks hear things. Better to stay out." I nodded, unable to speak. Weeks later, I searched archives in Charleston. I found mention of her, the widow of Grafton Wash. A miner's wife, widowed by a shaft collapse. She wandered the hollows, calling the names of men who entered. If she spoke yours, you'd vanish. Some said she returned what she took, only changed your food, your tools, your very breath. I shut the book while rising. It's been months since I left the Washington. I haven't camped again. Haven't walked farther than the grocery lot. But last week in my own yard, I found something by the back steps. My lantern, upright, wick polished. And that night, as I closed the curtains, I swear I heard a soft knock on the siding, 3 slow taps.